dressed in white, every wrong made right. I see a rose in bloom at the sight of you. So priceless, irreplaceable, unmistakable, incomparable, talent's beautiful. I see it all in you. So priceless. No matter what you've heard, this is what you're worth. More than all the money or the diamonds and pearls. Oh, this is who you are. Yeah, this is who you are. So when it's late, you're wide awake, too much to take. Don't shit that forget that in the pain you can be brave. Hear me say, I see you dressed in white, every wrong made right. I see a rose in bloom at the sight of you. So irreplaceable.
We're going to get rolling in about 2 minutes. This is the 2-minute countdown to grab your coffee and put a lid on it and get in here, and we'll get rolling.
We can start again, give honor till the end, love. We can start again. Brothers, we can start again, give honor till the end, yeah. We can start again. I see you dressed in white, every wrong made right. I see a rose in bloom at the sight of you. I see you dressed in white, every wrong made right. I see a rose in bloom at the sight of you. So priceless, irreplaceable, unmistakable, incomparable, talent's beautiful. I see it all in you. So priceless, yeah. I see you dressed in white, every wrong made right. I see a rose in bloom at the sight of you. I see you dressed in white, every wrong made right. I see a rose in bloom at the sight of you. I see you dressed in white, every wrong made right. I see a rose in bloom at the sight of you. I see you dressed in white, every wrong made right. So priceless.
Each year, a staggering 1 in 6 people are victims of a violent crime. But there is a place where survivors can go.
Are you caffeinated up? Everyone ready? Did you get a muffin? Yes, 2 muffins. We're going to do something a little bit different now. The texting, I believe, is still up. Whose phone is that going to? Sean's? So what's going to happen is we're going to get the ball rolling and just ask a few questions. We're going to kind of bounce questions off each other just to get the morning started. But please, as things get rolling, raise your hand. Text Sean. He'll raise his hand on your behalf if you're not the public speaking type. But the purpose of this time is to ask anything you want. If you want to talk about church sizes, church systems, growth barriers, churches on the district, and what is a general trend that's happening, whatever you want to ask, now is your opportunity. But first, what we'll do is, you heard a bit of my story. You heard a bit of how I landed to how I got to Yarmouth Wesleyan. You may not have heard their stories in same detail. So since you're standing, Assistant District Superintendent, DS-elect, would you like to come and give them a little bit of your history? Isn't it DS hyphenated elect?
I'm going to have to put up with this nonsense for a few more months, and then hopefully I can buy enough votes this summer and see what happens. I grew up in all various parts of the Wesleyan Church. I was born to Reformed Baptist Wesleyans. shortly after the merger, but came from that background on both sides of my family tree with my mom and my dad. And the day I was born, they were en route, not literally, but en route to Zambia, Africa, to be Wesleyan missionaries. Some of you know Bill and Joyce Moore. They pastored for a few years down the road here in just outside of Yarmouth at Sanford Wesleyan. And some of you may have met them during the years that they were there. And so I grew up as a Wesleyan missionary kid in Zambia and came back to Canada. My dad was pastoring in Fredericton, first with B.C. Cochran and then with Dave Leroy. He was on staff there. And so I graduated from Fredericton High School. I went to Kingswood, then Bethany, graduated from there with my 4-year ministry degree. I had all the answers. What are the questions? I was ready to go. And went to Australia immediately following that to work for 2 years with our Wesleyan church in the state of Brisbane on the east coast of Australia. And one of our pastors here on the district was the lead pastor at the church where I was a youth music pastor for a couple of years. Den Guptill, some of you know him. He pastors currently in Hammonds Plains, a church that he came back from Australia to plant, and he is still there after all these years. And when I returned from Australia, my wife now was my girlfriend when I went to Australia. We were apart for a year, and then she came over for 8 months, and we thought, well, this is kind of working out okay, so we decided we might do something a little more permanent. And first weekend I got back from Australia, I took her to the Algonquin in St. Andrews and popped the question and got down on one knee, and she said yes. It was a miracle. And I had lived in Australia for 2 years where you are not supposed to tip in restaurants. And I had forgotten that that's a thing you do. You just don't tip there. They consider it an insult. They pay their servers well, and they feel like you're making them a charity case if you tip them. True story. I'm not making that up. So this was the first restaurant I'd eaten in North America in 2 years. And here I was at a fancy joint like the Algonquin, and I forgot to tip them. I was so excited about getting engaged, and somehow they forgave me, I guess. So we got married that year, which was in 1994, and I worked for a year at Kingswood University recruiting new students, and then worked on staff in the church that I had attended in high school at First Wesleyan, now Journey Wesleyan. I was the music pastor and kind of an associate pastor dealing with discipleship issues in the church there for 2 years. And I was happy as a clam at high tide. I mean, I was loving it. Things were going great. We thought we were going to be there a long time. And then this man showed up and ruined my good day. And we had a church on the district. Some of you may remember a church in Cole Harbor, Hillside, which he happens to know a little about since he started it in 1974. And there had been a split in the church. This was in 1997. And he came in and slid a piece of paper across the table. Do you remember that day? Slid a piece of paper across the table and said, "I'm looking for a man that has these qualities." I picked up the paper and I looked down through the list. He said, "I'm intending to make him a man with this title." He slid another paper with the same list of qualities, but the title was Senior Pastor at Hillside Wesleyan Church. And I said, "Well, good luck. Hope you find somebody." So we found ourselves within a few weeks relocating to Dartmouth to a very difficult situation, a broken church, and had an opportunity to begin a long healing ministry. We had the privilege of serving there for 10 years. All 3 of our daughters were born at the Grace IWK during those years, and my wife actually was also born there, but not during that time. And we just had a wonderful experience there and saw some great things happen in the church. And in addition to the church healing and getting back on track, we were able to be a part of helping to seed families and money and help launch a couple of other Wesleyan churches in the area during that time. After that wrapped up, this man decided to get a job in Indianapolis running the missions department. And I told him, if you get nominated for this, I'm going to be at the end of your driveway with my U-Haul all packed. I'll go sharpen pencils, whatever you need. And so he took mercy on me and drug me along with him to Global Partners in Indianapolis, and I served, had the opportunity, a great learning opportunity, to serve our global international Wesleyan Church for 5 years as director of operations, his number 2 guy, and then he retired, in quotes. I think it means something different for him than most anybody else we know. He retired from there, and I stayed for a couple of more years with our new executive director of Global Partners, Dr. Dennis Jackson, and then he couldn't get along without me. And so he called me to come and be his assistant DS, which of course I was very privileged to do, and have been doing that now for 3 years. And so that's kind of my story and my background. So the way I'll contribute to the questions and some of my experiences will come out of a wide variety of seeing the church from all kinds of different angles. So now he's going to say something that'll put me in my place. I like to set him up so that he can do that because it's so entertaining for everyone. So here he is.
AJ just said, go get the mic from him. You'll probably never stop talking. So,
I'm a major prophet.
indeed, we have this thing about major and minor prophets. You know, in the Old Testament, some of the prophets were called major, others were called minor, but it had nothing to do with the importance of their message. They were called major or minor according to the volume of what they said, right? The major prophet books all have multiple chapters. The minor prophets, some only have 1 page. So it's not the importance of what they said, it's just how long they blah, 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 blah. Ladies and gentlemen, I present our major prophet, the Reverend. He's the major and I'm called the minor, and this is the micro prophet, right? I mean, he can change the whole world in 2 words. So anyway, thank you, all of you, for being here this morning. Some of you in general terms would know my little story, because, you know, my story's longer. But I was born into the family of a Reformed Baptist pastor. My dad, who was a Grand Manan native, and my mother was from Fredericton. And I was born in St. John when my dad was pastoring the Wesleyan or the Reformed Baptist Church in Blacks Harbor. And then as a child, my dad died when I was 10, so I only had him in that first decade of my life, but 5 years of that were spent just down the road from here. My father pastored from 1949 to 1954. I was born in 45, so I was just a kid in what was then a 3-church circuit. Port Maitland, Sanford, and Brazil Lake were all 1 circuit. Had church and Sunday school in the morning, church and Sunday school in the afternoon, and church at night. You had prayer meeting on Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. That was the era that was mentioned last night about 2-week revival meetings, spring and fall. When you have 3 churches, that's 6 weeks of revival meetings, spring and fall. So by the time I was 10 years old, I'd been to church as much as John Wesley ever went to church. Like, I was just up there. The year before my father died, we moved to Corbett Avenue, where AJ was talking about this morning, and pastored there for about a year. My dad died with a heart attack in December of 1955. My life, I went through school there. I went to academy of the high school at what was then Bethany Bible College, graduated there, and picked up some other education along the way. But I started out in life, I believe God called me to the ministry when I was in high school. But I decided I'd sooner be rich than righteous. Not to be unrighteous, just not too righteous. So I had worked in the banking industry, and I had a summer job in the bank, actually with Canada Trust Company, a wholly owned subsidiary of Scotiabank. And I had worked with them in the summer, and they offered me a full-time job. And so instead of pursuing going into what I thought I should be doing for theological training, I decided I'm going to take that other job and forget about the ministry thing. So I did. I spent 6 years at that. During that period of time, I found and married a young gal from the Lutz Mountain Church of the Nazarene near Moncton. And so my wife, Gloria, who's now been married to me more than 51 years, she married a banker and got a preacher thrown in later. So it was a bait and switch deal. You ever have one of those? I need to be careful where I look. So do you ever have a bait and switch? So she thought she's marrying a guy with a secure financial future, was going to be in the banking industry, and about 3 or 4 years. We were married in 65, and I quit my job in 71. So after having that period of time all in there, when everything looked different, she was working as in an engineering office in Moncton, and we quit and packed up and sold some furniture and stored some furniture and moved in with her parents so I could go back to Bethany. Her dad was a dairy farmer near Moncton. So that wasn't exactly the dream deal that she thought she was getting at the start. That's where we ended up. I learned lots of stuff about dairy farming too. And by the way, my father-in-law paid me the supreme compliment a dairy farmer can pay somebody. He went to Newfoundland a week hunting and left me with the place. You agree that's an honor? I mean, that doesn't happen, right? That's like leaving your whole livelihood in the hands of some snotty kid and going off to Newfoundland. Like, anyhow, but I had always struggled with this thing about God was calling me to the ministry. Like that was down underneath there somewhere. And so finally, back there, whatever year it was, 70 or 71, I got that sorted out at Beulah, that I ought to do that. And you know, the funny thing, I don't want to make this too long, you think I'm a major prophet, but this may be helpful to some of you younger people here that are going to grapple with God's will for your life. The devil will find something that's important to you, that you like to do, and convince you that if you follow God fully with your life, you'll never get to do that thing, whatever that thing is, right? When I had been with the banking thing, I got elevated for a while to what they call the internal audit staff, and I had traveled to every province in Canada helping to do inspections, branch inspections, and I loved that traveling piece. I enjoyed that. That was a big deal to me. So when I was trying to figure out what I'm going to do with this call to ministry, the devil was saying in my ear, if you accept this call that God has in your life to me, you'll never travel again. You'll be lost in the backwoods of New Brunswick. Your mother won't even know where you are. I mean, that's it. You understand what you're giving up. And so I don't know if you ever face an issue with God's call in your life, what you might have to wrestle with. But for me, I had to give up the idea of travel. Seems kind of weird maybe, but that was a struggle for me, right? Since that time, I've been in 101 countries. Between being general superintendent and global partners director and all that kind of stuff. So it proves once again the devil is a liar. He just is. He just doesn't tell the truth. So anyhow, I went to Bethany, went down to Blacks Harbor to pastor. Y'all know where Blacks Harbor, New Brunswick is? Somebody said about it one time, God must have laid you there, nobody else could have found it. And that's where my father had pastored before. So I'm down there now, I'm 28 or whatever the heck I was. I'm down there at Blacks Harbor, and the old ladies in the church, a few of them, like well, they don't look so old now as they did then, but the old ladies in the church used to come up to me and say, I remember you, Sonny. And it never felt like a compliment. Like it felt like something altogether different. Pastored there for 3 years. The district asked if we would go to Dartmouth to plant a church there, what is now Hillside, so we did that in 1974. Started out in a school, built the building that they have there now and stayed there 6 years. And then, so my total pastoral experience is 9 years, right? People who know how to pastor do. Those who can't make a go of it become administrators, somebody once said. So ever since 1980, I have been in church administration. I've been a district superintendent twice in the Atlantic District and once in the Delta District, which is Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, for a total of 22 years. I was general superintendent for 8. I was general director of Global Partners for 5. And so that's kind of been my cycle. I have one wife and 2 kids. So we have a son and a daughter, and each of them have a son and a daughter. So that's kind of our family tree. And our daughter is, she and her 2 children. My daughter's divorced, and she's a single mom. Not what anybody dreams of for their kids. She lives a kilometer from us. We're pretty involved in the life of those 2 little ones. They're 9. I have a grandson there that's 9 and a granddaughter 12 going on 20, one of those deals. Right, and then our son and his wife, they have 2 kids also. They live in Sussex. So they're just down the road a little ways. And that's the short story of my 71 years.
So what we're planning to do here for the next little bit, we're going to go until about 11:45 unless we quit earlier than that. So if they have the mic more than I do, we'll finish early. That's how this is going to work. But what we're going to do is kind of ask each other some questions to prime conversation and some of the ideas that we would like to share with you. But we also want to make very clear to you, as you know, has been said, you need to text that number. You need to feel free to raise your hand at any point to contribute or ask further questions based on what we're talking about. So let's start with this. If you were going to pastor a church today, and for you, if you left the church you're at now, which probably wouldn't be advisable, but if you were, and you were to go to a new church for both of you, what characteristics and traits would you find the most attractive in that new church that you're going to pastor, and why?
My answer to that, by the way, as you know, I think Peter's been nominated. I'm retiring in July, sort of. I am. From this job, I am fully. And Peter's been nominated to succeed me. You heard his little line there about pleasure not leaving soon. If you're leaving, wait till July, please. And somebody else can work out the details later. If I was going to a pastor church now, I'd feel sorry for the church that called me, you understand? I'm an old guy and I haven't pastored for years, but I have a keen gift of observation, however. I have been in a lot of places, hundreds literally of local churches, some of which were perking pretty good and some were kind of sad and sick and everything else in between. If I was going to, there are many things you'd want to look for, right? Many of which you have here, facilities and all of that. But beyond the facility thing, if I was going to pastor a church, I would hope to find a group that were serious about the Great Commission. Actually understood that Christ came to the earth to seek and to save those who are lost, far from him. That's their task. People who had an honorable respect for the past but did not worship it, and had a focused laser vision on the future and saying, what is God blessing now? Let's go and do that. Right, so I'd kind of be on are we serious? We give a lot of lip service to some of those things we're not all that serious about. So I'd be looking around for that a little bit. I'd echo. He just said amen. See the micro prophet, hear that? There it was. There it was an amen. Sometimes, just a second before we go, that sometimes in churches recruiting pastors or the DS helping them recruit pastors, they ask good questions, but they're not the right ones. And sometimes prospective pastors coming to a place, they ask good questions, they're not necessarily the right ones. There are questions that need to be asked in that process, like if a pastor's coming in, it's a reasonable question. Do you have a parsonage or is it a housing allowance arrangement, right? Do you have a salary? If so, what is it? You know, and those kind of things are important and they need to be asked. There's nothing wrong with them. But they come at the end of the conversation, not at the first of it, right? And the bigger, higher questions are kingdom questions, right? And the same that should be asked of the candidate. In my judgment, some churches sometimes get sidetracked in that they want to know, well, how many degrees do you have? And how many universities have you attended? There's nothing wrong with education. But, you know, there's a lot of uneducated, there are a lot of highly educated, unemployed people. So anyway, before I wander too much on that.
Yeah, I would echo the passion of the people, hands down. I'll throw you two a question, just by the nature of what you guys do. Typically, most people know the church they attend because that's the church they attend. Most people born and raised in a church or a community, so you don't get to see the broader church. You guys have traveled extensively this district and around. As you're traveling and as you're having conversations with pastors, what are you finding as common traits that are holding churches back from realizing their potential? What issues are you bumping into? What's hurting churches? This whole weekend is on maximizing impact. Why aren't more churches maximizing their impact?
Well, I'll throw a couple out, and then we'll see where this goes. One of the easiest things for us to do as Christ followers is to start out strong in our passion for the Lord and in the mission that he just articulated. And then over time, it becomes about us, not about the mission. And so for me, I think one of the greatest challenges that sometimes it's recognized, sometimes it's very subtle, but at the heart, a church is either more deeply committed to their preferences than they are to the need to reach the lost and to be a church that will expand to reach the people in their area. And so if your preferences actually are a priority higher than your passion for seeing the Great Commission happen, then it will hold the church back. And there are all kinds of ways that is manifested and all kinds of ways that we see that happen in the church. But that would be one that I think is a very clear obstacle. And another obstacle that a lot of churches experience is a culture of trust in the leadership. I think if that is not present, then that can create a lot of challenges. And we've heard from a lot of your leaders and interacted with a lot of you. And while there's no interest in our part to take a deep dive into the specifics of your immediate history, we've seen a lot of positive things about how the church has dealt with that. But I think there can be a danger of saying, what is it, if we go too far with really trusting each other and being vulnerable to share how we need to change and move forward, are we more afraid of the conflict that might create than actually maximizing the impact that God wants us to have? And so that's a tension point that can happen within the leadership structure of any church. And sometimes you feel like a church is stuck. There's a church that I've been working with somewhere else on the district far away, and some of the leadership culture in that church is they'll have a plan and they'll have some steps, and then I'll talk to them in a month and they won't have done anything because one person objected in some way and slowed down the process. And maybe it was a direct criticism or maybe it was a more subtle way of kind of sidetracking things. And there was just such a commitment sometimes in churches that we don't need to just respect everybody and listen to a few, like you said earlier, but that everybody needs to agree before we can take one step forward. And when you are imprisoned by that, it will hold you back. And you have to do the hard work and be willing to risk. And even, if necessary, be willing to release people to find places where they can grow and serve in the kingdom of God. If they demand that kind of environment to be a part of your church, then that's not healthy. And so those two things would be barriers.
A couple of things in my mind that I think are barriers sometimes. It's really easy for church people to come to believe, even though they may never articulate it, to come to believe that the church that they're a part of exists for them. When in fact, the church, if it's true to its mission, exists for people who aren't even coming to it. Right? The mission of the church is not to keep everybody inside it happy and satisfied and have all of their criticisms well-oiled. It's actually to create like he talked about this morning, that actually appeals to the people who aren't there. The church exists for those who do not attend it. That's always kind of a hard thing, I think. That's one. And then the other, without making this too long, is in terms of the church's own philosophy of ministry, how do they order these three words in their priority? And those are the words belong, believe, and behave or become. Like what order do you have those in? The believing, the belonging, and what's the other one? Becoming, right? Like what order do they fit in? I grew up in the RB church. That's my background. Was I? No, I wasn't. I was going to say I was ordained by the Reformed Baptist. I wasn't, but I joined the Reformed Baptist Church in 1961 in Fredericton, what is now called Cross Point. G.R. Simons, John's dad, was the pastor there and used to give us all a manual of the Reformed Baptist Church with the date we became a member and his name signed it. I still have that, right? But I grew up in a culture, and we still have it to some extent, where you believe, you find Christ, then you become. You learn all the rules and regulations and get them all sorted out, and then you could belong. Well, we're trying to turn that on its head a little bit denominationally. Say, you believe. It's very important to have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and then you can belong. We'll give you our hand and say, you're my brother, you're my sister, and then we'll help you to become. That shift makes a huge difference in how the church is able to engage its culture and its community going forward. And if we hold to the old paradigm, I see churches that hold to the old paradigm, you must believe and then you must become all of these things, and finally you can belong. It's a hindrance going forward. Because some of those things in that list, they're not biblical, they're just cultural. They're not anti-biblical necessarily, but they're not biblical. They're just cultural. So that's, without going too deep into that.
So let me throw a question for the two of you to respond to, and we'll start with you, AJ, on this. Obviously, numbers, as an end unto themselves, like you said, we could fill this place tonight if we said we're going to give away 5 MacBook Airs, and people could come and we could do something to fill it. It's not about the numbers. But healthy churches grow. If your child is supposedly healthy and doesn't grow, you take them to the doctor to find out what's happening. So because healthy churches grow, what is required from a church to go from being a small church to a medium church because of the way God is entrusting that community of faith with the lost people that he is drawing to them?
I think for us, even at Corbett, when we started seeing new bodies, remember I said we weren't ready for it because we wouldn't know what to do with them. For us, we had no systems in place. So it was the few doing the work of the many. It was the handful with their sore backs carrying the church down the road. And so for us, to go from small to medium, we had to change structures. So when you read about Moses and Jethro, when all the people were bringing all the problems to Moses, and Jethro says, you're a foolish young man, divide up and divvy it up, we had to start doing that. And so whether it was staff or lay people, we had to start dividing and conquering, because if one person oversees 100, if that model rolls forward, is one person can oversee 300, and so it just keeps going. And so we had to start dividing up the responsibilities. The first thing we did at Corbett was start developing pastoral care type teams. So just the sheer needs of the people, whether it was hospital, whether it was visitation, pastoral care, appointments, marriage issues, just the sheer volume of issues, because new people coming in really messy, it was just multiplying beyond what I could handle. And so we quickly put in teams to tend to our own people. Our people released me to tend to the new people, and they said, we'll take care of ourselves. We'll minister one to another, as Paul says. You go deal with the new issues coming in. You seem a little better equipped for that. So the pastoral care piece was the first thing we had to figure out. And then that weird tension of the pastor doing less better. Does that resonate? Before, me showing up at everything or trying to be at everything might have been a common thing, but the volume of things happening was getting too great. And then I had little kids, and so do I tuck my kids in at night, or do I be out? How do I juggle that? So we agreed that I'd be out 2 to 3 nights a week, and that seemed agreeable to the church and the family. But then the people had to tend for themselves. So those were the pastoral care piece of the masses, and then doing less better. So preaching, problematic counseling situations, and then the leadership development piece was the other big one. So that the structural systems piece was our biggest issue. Do you want to throw any color commentary?
Looking at our past attendance in the past 10 or 15 years, we've been declining. So instead of climbing, we're declining. So it could be assumed that we are sick. The past 3 years, we've sustained the same number. So I would look at that as possibly healing, but not healthy.
Your statistical reference opens, in my mind at least, it opens, Tracy, it opens this issue that we haven't really talked about openly since we've been here, right? There is an event in the recent history of this church that contributed directly to the statistical issue, in my opinion, right? And I believe, my observation, I was here, as you know, I've been in this church probably 10 times in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, quite a little bit. My observation, based on my limited time here, but my observation is that epic issue back there 4 years ago or whenever that was, that epic issue back there has, I believe, been largely moved past, and attitudes have been corrected and forgiveness has been granted and all of that, right? But I still believe, but I could be wrong, right? It's unusual for me to hedge so badly, but I still believe it's true that that lurks in the shadows a little bit. And there ought to be some time, maybe, perhaps, we recommended something like this in another situation. There ought to be a time when it's actually said publicly, we all know what happened in 2013 or whatever year that was, and all that happened, and the things that were said on both sides. And we had it figured out who were the yeses and who were the nos, or thought we did. And we had a lot of upheaval, and it caused the pastoral family to leave and caused great pain in the church. And if you have a bad attitude with that, you go and get that fixed. Because if you do not, you'll answer someday to a lot higher official than me. So get that fixed. And now we're going to bury that, and it's never going to be mentioned publicly again in this church from now till Jesus comes back. We're going to put this behind us and say that was an unfortunate chapter and it happened, and whether you were a yes or a no, I don't care. It's over, and now we're going to go forward with it and not let the devil drag us down by memories of that, and don't ever raise it again, or I'll come and put sugar in your gas tank. Like, don't do this. And I think, in my opinion is, as a group, the fellowship would be helped if a declaration is we're done with that. And stop. And I don't know that anybody in this room is doing this, but there is an unavoidable temptation to say, I know what he thought, right? And I don't agree with that, therefore I don't like him anymore. Like that stuff, it generates, because the devil loves that. A house divided against itself, what? Cannot stand. So I may be way off, but I don't think I am. And I think something needs to be done to say, we hated it, it was crappy, or worse, we could think of 4-letter words that would fit. It was really a bad deal, but it's over and it's past, and we're going forward, and we're going to kick the devil right in the head and stick a sharp stick at his eye, and we're not going to labor under that anymore. And I think personal growth and the health of individual believers will be increased. You understand the great healing power of forgiveness. It's not whether you, if you had grieved me in some way, which you haven't, I'm just talking, but it's an illustration. If I had aught against you for something you may have said, the power in forgiveness is not you coming to ask me to forgive you. In a way, all that's good. The power is me forgiving you whether you ask or not. Right? Real forgiveness grants it to the other person, whether they ever said, I'm sorry or not. It doesn't make any difference. And so the way to health, I think, for individuals in this church and for the group, is to let that chapter be what it was and bury the hatchet, handle and all, and say, we're not going there. If anybody wants to talk about it, tell them that. We're not going there. We've resolved that. We love Jesus first and we love each other, and that's an unfortunate thing, but we're done with that. And we're not going there. We're just not going there. And I believe that will contribute to health in the body and health in the believer. That make sense at all? I think you're better than you think you are. I first came to Havelock Wesleyan Church when my parents, I was 4 or 5 years old, and my parents came to visit Gordon and Marjorie Prime in the farm up on the hill over there. I even went to school, I was telling Geneva yesterday, I even went to school one day with Harold at the school that used to be down in the valley, this side of the old Prime place down there, right? I was too young to go to school, but they didn't care. So Harold took me to school. So my first going to school ever was at New Tuscott over there, probably, not Havelock, right? So that was, so anyhow, I got all that back there. You've always had high quality people, and you still have them. You've always had multi-generations represented in your congregation, and you still have them. You've had a little tendency toward legalism that has bit you more than once in the past and still lurks in the shadows a little. But because legalism doesn't lead anywhere except to more of it. But what I saw, Victoria, and I still believe is here, is a group of people who have real love for Jesus and real love for their community and the potential to work together so that this is already one of the outstanding churches, you know, anywhere from Weymouth down to wherever, right? But the potential is great there, but the devil has succeeded across the years in somehow getting the congregation embroiled in issues that in the light of eternity don't matter, some of them. And then this issue I referred to already with Peter and all of them. But what have I seen? What I just said. People of quality and multi-generational, right? You go to some churches, like everybody in them is my age. You want to find a sick place, that's it, right? Except for Maynard, which is, he's older than me. Give him a hand. Right? So I'm 70 years old. I'm among the oldest people in this room. You know how good that is? How old are you, Lewis? 41. How old are you? How old are you, Muriel? How old are you? There you go. How old are you, darling? How much? See, she's a kid. She's only 64. How old are you? 53. I found out yesterday. Yeah, you look older. How old are you? Yeah, Geneva's 64, I know, right? So what's the point I'm making? There's a lot of juice and energy and future ministry and power to do good tied up in this crowd. And you can't let the devil steal it from you because of some bad things that happen back there. And you can't fight battles that don't matter. But the potential for this to be like a going, booming place that's not just numbers, although that's there too, but for touching people far from God and see them become fully devoted followers of Christ, that's right in your grasp if you want it. You got to figure out what's important. Does that answer your question? What are we doing now? Who's running the show?
One of the questions we've kicked around at almost every church we've been to, because it comes up at almost every church we've been to, and it came up at Corbett, it was mentioned last night. One of the most powerful tools for the church is also one of the most divisive, and that's music. Agreed? It just has this incredible power to reach people. It has incredible power to connect with people. And yet, I can't think of anything more divisive in a church than music and worship and styles. For myself, for the Pope of Havelock, for all of us who are leading local churches, how do you guys counsel, give wisdom when it comes to navigating the music battles, the music tensions? We've all faced them. Every single church, it seems, goes through that. How do you guys counsel and give wisdom when it comes to music?
Well, I have been a appointed, staffed worship leader in 3 churches. And probably for the first 10 years of my ministry, almost every week, I led worship with various worship teams, and have seen a lot of changes even since then as I began to hire staff that would lead worship, and have now been a part of watching that evolve way beyond any capacity I had. We have so much talent that is emerging within our ranks in this area. But I think the principles remain the same, in that those who are entrusted and delegated authority by the lead pastors to have the responsibility of music ministry for their church, that is a sacred trust that should be carefully stewarded. It doesn't mean that person should try to please everyone, because if you try to please everyone, you end up pleasing no one. Neither should that person imagine where the church could be 5 years from now and start there next week. That would be unwise. In fact, one church where I began serving as music minister, the summer previous to when I started, there was a Kingswood student that was doing an internship there, and they introduced literally 2 or 3 new songs every week, all summer long. And the church had it when I showed up. They had it. And I have thanked that person many, many times, because all I had to do was smile and sing something familiar, and I was a hero. It was awesome. And they have acknowledged their mistake. I mean, their heart wasn't in the wrong place, but their thinking was. And so I think it's very important for those who are leading in the music side of worship to understand who is currently in the church, but to always balance that with the agreed upon target that the leadership of the church has determined. Who are we here for ultimately, and how do we need to continue to change to be ready for who God is sending us? And it is often more art than science, but it first starts, I believe, in the heart of the people or person who is entrusted to be the worship leader of the church. And I know we have several of you here. You shared that you have a multiple worship leader scenario in this church. But I think that if the heart of a person is, and I mean no disrespect to anyone, I have no clue. I've never been here on a Sunday morning, so I'm not slinging mud at anybody. I don't have a clue what you do here. But if the heart of a person is, I only play accordion and kazoo and only sing hymns that were written before 1500 in Latin, and if you like something different than that, then that's too bad, because that's all I do. I'm never going to change. I mean, if there's anything remotely close to that in your heart, then you need to do the honorable thing and step down and let someone with a heart that is willing to minister to the breadth of what is in the church, but with a bent always to how are we constantly changing to prepare for those that are being sent to us as we reach out. And so I think that is, if you want to call it the secret sauce, which is an imbalance, absolutely. And so only doing the new is an imbalance. And I think the issue of how many choruses, how many hymns, how new the songs are, how old the songs are, I think you can spend a lot of time wrestling in the mud with each other over things that do not affect eternity. But the leadership of the church must make clear decisions. The pastor, with the board assisting them, must make clear decisions about this is the direction that we are headed with the music aspect of who we are as a church, and those that are involved in the music should be willing to submit to and align to that and be a part of that story, because the music needs to serve the mission, not become an end unto itself. And that's the key in that process.
He said if you play did I get that right? If you play the accordion and the kazoo and you only do hymns written before 1500 in Latin, you should quit. I agree with that, but if that's you, don't quit for another week. Come tomorrow morning, I want to see that. I want to see what that looks like. One of the things I've always taken some level of comfort in on the music thing is John Wesley got in trouble over music. We carry his name. Why should we think that's a new thing? You know why he got in trouble, right? He and his brother. They wrote songs, they wrote new lyrics, but the music they used were from the tunes that were being sung in the bars and the taverns of England. So when you sing those old Wesley hymns, and can it be that I should gain an interest in my Savior's name? The music for that came out of a tavern. As did most of Wesley's stuff. Maybe not all, but much of it. What were they doing? They were trying to package the gospel in something that the man who didn't know the gospel understood because he just heard the tune down the road. Right? So that always has kind of been a balancer for me. I grew up in the praise and worship. And if you know what I mean by the praise and worship hymn book, do you ever have that? It had 497 hymns in it. We knew 30 of them. We did, really. 170 was at Calvary. 236 was Blessed Assurance. 497 is Just As I Am. Number 1 was All Hail the Power. Number 40 was Oh Worship the King. Look them up, that's all true. Yeah, check them out. So, you know, we loved that, but we didn't really love it because we only sang about 5% of what was in it. Right? So we just sometimes battle lines have been drawn in the wrong places, because we didn't actually sing much of that stuff. But that's what I grew up on, and that's what still my first love. It is, I must tell you. But if my neighbor, who's far from God, is somehow warmed toward the message of the gospel by music that he or she better understands, I'm all for that. But in balance. Let me
add one more thing to the music conversation, which applies to any kind of change in a church. But do you know why people resist change? We all do it. Do you know why we resist change? Is it because we're afraid of something that's new? That's often what is implied when leaders sometimes try to guilt you into doing something that they want you to do. But do you know what research has shown is the number one reason that the majority of people resist change? It's because you're smart. True. Now just follow this logic. Smart people quickly figure out that if I have to give up the comfortable thing, the old thing that I'm really good at and know how to do, and am even respected for, if I have to give that up and start embracing something that I am not yet good at or respected for, then for a season, whether that's a month or a year or years, I am going to have to look foolish learning something new and getting used to something that is not familiar to me. And I know this isn't a very spiritual principle in a way, but research has shown that the primary reason people resist change is because they're smart. And they have it figured out. They're going to have to do things that are harder for them initially, that they will not be good at. And you have to find a way within the church leadership to create a path for them to normalize that, be okay with that. And of course, in the music context, you can say, look, this is a newer song. Some of you may or may not like this. Probably most of you don't know this. If you want to just listen, we're going to sing this for the next couple of weeks. You can make it easy for people to kind of work their way down the path without introducing, like my friend did, 4 new worship choruses every Sunday all summer long. So the reason that you, deep down inside, may feel like you want to resist change is in large part because you're smart and you have it figured out. It is going to be a lot harder to do that than if you just keep doing what you're good at and what you enjoy. But here's the great thing, just like Dr. H.C. said about the Wesley brothers. They introduced a whole new idea that had people wanting to string them up everywhere they went. Eventually, it became the thing that God used the most because they stuck with it until they got to where they needed to be. And so that would be my challenge to anyone, especially those of you who are in leadership or participate in the worship in the church. Agree because of missional reasons why it is important to go where you think you need to go. Submit to the leadership of the church in that. And then just put it out there. It's not always going to sound pretty. It's not always going to sound great. Sometimes it's going to be hard. And it's okay. There's going to be a season where we're constantly working through embracing these new things that will, in fact, touch the heart of the person far from God who ends up coming here because this church is making a difference in this region. But we have permission to keep changing because we believe in the reason behind it, not because it reflects a new preference for a different generation.
Corollary truth to his deal about change, it wasn't just music. Like across the years that I've been in ministry now, which is a long time, preachers were under pressure on, are you going to use no notes? The people who love Jesus and are in tune with the Holy Spirit, they're going to preach with no notes. That was the flavor of the month at one time. The opposite flavor of the month was, if you're a scholar and a student want to be sure what you're saying, you should only preach from a manuscript. Then there was the one in between. Have 3 points, a poem, and a sad story. That was kind of the in-between one, right? But there was pressure when those various little things came along. If you were a manuscript person, and people are saying, no, if you love Jesus, it's no notes. You have any idea the kind of pressure that puts on someone? And so I'm just saying, this wasn't all confined to the music. And a little story, I'm sorry. What can I tell you? Do what? No, I got it. No, in a minute. Who do you think's running this show? You,
You know what, I think...
you young punk?
I think he just decided to reopen the church on Wood Island in Graham and Ann.
Yeah, we'll check for questions in a minute. He's just bugging me here. Yeah, I haven't forgotten my story, though. Way back in the day, in the early 50s, my uncle, my mother's brother, was the district superintendent in the district, and that's when there was a few people around that thought preaching with no notes proved you love Jesus more than the other guys, right? So he's storming away. You folks stop talking about me, cut that out. This guy who thought no notes are the right thing, he was preaching at Beulah in one afternoon service, and he's storming away, and he wanted to quote a verse of scripture, and he couldn't get his head to bring it up. Didn't have it in the notes. Couldn't get it. And he looked at my uncle and said, Brother Cochran, what's that verse? My uncle said, that's where your notes come in handy. Was that full of the Holy Ghost and wisdom? I don't know, but it makes a good story. Now, I will satisfy this young Turk over here. Do you have any questions, please? We do, really. We welcome your questions. Is that good, Daddy? We okay?
Yes, we balance the tension of change. I've often viewed it as when to decide to buy a new car. When to make that decision. It's not working, you put more money into it, you put more energy in it, keep it going for a while, keep it long enough so it becomes an antique, and then it's, there's that whole analogy. I was listening to a guy talk about the Pontiac. And it wasn't until GMC got into bankruptcy that she had a lawyer look at all their stuff and said, Pontiac's got to die in order for you to survive. It hasn't made profit for 40 years. All discussion that they had in boardrooms for probably 40 years, but nobody actually wanted to kill Pontiac. GMC wouldn't be here today, according to the pros.
Yep.
Had some lawyer or judge that looked down and said it needs to die. Nobody ever wants to get to that stage that we have to get somebody else to look in. But how do we have fresh eyes? To be looking at the things that we're doing to decide we just need to put more grit and energy into this? Or do we need to bolt in?
Yeah.
How do you balance that now?
Laying all jokes aside, this guy's been through that up at Corbett. I mean, he had to answer some of those questions. I have an opinion, but you have experience.
We had to go down that road too. And one of the things we started to develop was a ministry audit. Something that was as objective as possible, because that's actually an emotional debate, not a logical debate. And so as soon as emotions get into it, things go off the rails sideways quickly. So we started building something called a ministry audit, that we let the leaders run this grid of questions, and they weren't emotional. They were things like, is this ministry fulfilling the mission of the local church? So is it doing what it's supposed to do? The other question, which was way more convicting, was name some tangible fruit from this ministry in a said period of time. So Corba had to go through it. Yarmouth Wesleyan just went through it, and we axed the LCT. Have you got anybody here attend the Living Christmas Tree at Yarmouth Wesleyan? Anybody? Yes, no? Nobody? Okay. All right, see? There you go. They ran this Living Christmas Tree because Moncton did. And when Moncton axed it, they finally thought, well, that's why we were doing it, because Moncton was doing it, so we started it. They couldn't name a family in the last 5 years that they could identify, because that was their outreach event, that had come to the church because of that outreach event. So it became an event they were doing because they loved to do it. So we started running ministries through this ministry audit just to ask us, are we losing money? In our case, it's souls. Are we adding any kingdom fruit? Is there anything happening? And then for a Corbett situation, we gave them a 1 year, do something. Repurpose it, rebrand it, do what you have to do with it. But if it's run its season, let's throw it a farewell party. Let's finish it with celebratory versus when it just dies an ugly death and the horse is dead, no one's got off it yet. So that was our thing. Do you want to add anything to that, or? Is that a statement or question?
That's a question. Do we look at things like that look pretty successful? There are children coming.
Sure.
They're learning what they learn from there, but they're not being taught into our congregation. And you ask how many yesterday,
Yep.
how many are non-church? They're non-church, but their parents still are.
Sure.
Their children still are. And you graduate, and they still are. When do we just go, we're doing something wrong here, and discontinue things that look really good?
Probably not until you've exhausted your options first. So immediately in an audit, I'd be asking, where have you built on-ramps from youth group to the congregation? Do they know there's a Havelock Wesleyan church that exists beyond Wednesday or Tuesday night or anything? When was the last time you featured those teens in a Sunday morning service? When was the last time we have to exhaust all the options first. So at Yarmouth Weston, we have mac and cheese. We serve 300 kids lunch every Monday, or 250 kids, whatever it is. And when I got there, zero families, zero kids that we could tangibly name had merged over. Well, we hired a couple young guys, and we launched a Youth Alpha. On Wednesday afternoon, we built a ramp from mac and cheese to Youth Alpha. We now have 20 plus kids not coming for lunch, but coming for Youth Alpha on Wednesday, and we're running the Alpha program for 20 kids. So I could have walked in and shot it and put out its misery, or let's exhaust some options first. So from Alpha, the next question is, the next step. Don't add programs for program's sake, add steps. And so they're baby steps. We get them into Alpha. That's where it's just primarily teaching-based, not food-based. And so before I would gunslinging it, I would say, have I exhausted all the options for building on-ramps and connection points?
Well, and Jesus said that we were to bear fruit, more fruit, and much fruit, right? I mean, that's why we are here, which is the heart of your question. However, I would push back a little bit to say that the notion that the only fruit that counts is whether or not someone who is touched with the gospel through our church shows up on Sunday is the ultimate metric for every kind of ministry. And so, and I realize you and I agree on that. Obviously, with your track record and your heartbeat for the community, you totally get that. And so I think every aspect of mission has a measure that should be agreed upon and evaluated, as Pastor AJ said. But knowing what that looks like ahead of time, or what you believe it should be, is very different than just waiting till the end of the year with something and then drawing a circle around whatever happened and saying that was our bullseye. And so I like your question, and I think it speaks to us being accountable to one another for whether or not something actually is helping us fulfill mission. Any other questions? Is the pizza here yet? Sorry, it is? It is. Okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Oh, Victoria.
Yeah, I think there's two questions there. One, what have you heard that you might like that we could talk about some other day? We're only an hour apart, so we could get together, brainstorm, swap ideas. The other question you're asking is what will actually be in the report. I think anything that comes, because stuff we talked about here may not be in the report. So the report is usually pretty specific, and if there's next steps, they're next steps with samples of something. So whether this stuff makes it in the report or not, offline, we could still get together and brainstorm. Totally.
Have you shared the coaching aspect? I know Dr. Wilson did with the board, but I'm not sure if that's been shared.
Once we present this thing tomorrow, which is 5, 5, and 5, five things we believe we should be commended for, 5 areas of concern which mostly reflect what you said to us, and 5 prescriptions or recommendations to speak to those concerns. So we'll share that tomorrow without discussion. Within 2 weeks, the LBA is asked to get together, look this report over, and either say, yes, we're going to go with it, or no, we're not, and that's done in its entirety. You can't pick numbers 1 and 2. Either we accept it or we don't. If the board says, yes, we accept it, then one of the incentives, if you want to call it that we add to it, we will provide a coach, which in this case would be AJ, I think he's just down the road. We'd provide a coach for Pastor Sean for a year to help walk through the recommendations, say these are ways that these can be completed or fulfilled, and likely would interact, that would be their choice, likely interact with the LBA too during that period of time. So the report has an ongoing application mechanism through a coach if the board signs off. That do it, Alan? Peter can tell you a story on that. We had, well, he'll tell you, the answer is basically no, we haven't, but we had one that hiccuped and got weak knees, and how'd that go?
Well, it ended up with the person that was the cause for the board voting no initially, leaving the church. And not because they were a bad person, just they were not willing to pay the price to become the church they needed to be. And the church ended up revoting and accepting it and moving forward, and have had a great year of implementing that and growth. So yeah, that's the short answer.
If you vote no and you're on the board, you have to leave.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Now, I will say this. We are very pleased at the district's expense to provide this lunch for you, for all of you except for Alan. He has to pay $2 a slice for the pizza because he was giving us a hard time earlier about whether or not we were going to throw in anything to make this weekend worth his while. So since you said you get what you pay for, we want you to really enjoy your pizza. It's $2. You can give those toonies to pleasure. So let's have a prayer, and then we'll head out and enjoy our lunch together. Of course, we're happy to stick around and have conversations with as many of you as would like about some of these specific issues we've been discussing. More than happy to do that over lunch. Lord, thank you for these good people and for this good church. And I thank you for the pastoral team that you have blessed them with, and for the great days that are ahead. We do sense that they are on the cusp of digging down deep together and believing you for great days of kingdom impact and transformation. And so we claim that for them, and we thank you for all the ways you are going to provide for them to see that happen. We also want to thank you for providing this lunch for us today and for the time of fellowship and meaningful conversation we will enjoy together in your precious name. Amen.